Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 160, where we read and review philosophy live on air. So let's see, in Signs of the Times, because also I know nothing, very little about it, I've been hitting some of the philosophy of race, because why not learn something nowadays? Gender, so just random old papers, let's see what's available. Top of the list. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. Most of these are, a bunch of these were reviews here from contemporary political philosophy, so I gotta get past that. We looked at this yesterday. What did we do? Read Categorical Injustice, Science paper by Aust. Let's see what else we have. Demoralizing gay rights. Interesting. Is this a Gauche's demoralizing gay rights? Gonna take a look at that quickly. It seems we need more transitional justice. Alright, that's also on social philosophy today. Mourning, Melancholia, and Race Now. Whose Lives Matter? Black Lives Matter movement and the contested legacy of philosophical humanism. Let's see, anything else? Black Rights, White Wrongs. The Critique of Racial Liberalism. Alright, so let's go take a look at, see what's available. Yeah, this is more of a book review-y thing again, because, well, no, not exactly, but don't have access, so it doesn't matter. There's an argument on the Gauche. Alright, transitional justice. Let's see if this is here. Mourning, Melancholy, and Race Now. Let's see what this one is. Black Rights, White Wrongs. Don't have access. Don't have access. Oh, is this open access? This is a book review. And is this book review as well? Yeah, book review as well. Yeah, the contemporary political theory looks like a bunch of book reviews just came out, so that's what I'm looking at. Reply to Christopher LeBron. Let's just take a look. Replies tend to be shorter, so even though it doesn't have the page numbers on it, maybe it's available and good to read, or short enough for me to read in time constraints. What happens when we talk? It's by George Yancey, a review. Let's see what else we got. An Impossible Dream, Racial Integration in the United States. Not trusting anything from contemporary political philosophy. Looks like all these reviews. Nope, no access. Dag nabbit. Nope. Collective Choice, Social Welfare, Conservative Indigenous Australians. I'll take a look at that. Is this a review? No. Okay, so this is good. Ethics and Social Welfare. Collective Choice and Social Welfare Considerations for Indigenous Australians. Why not read this? Okie dokie. So, here's what we're doing today. If you want to grab the link, it's in the chat now. If you come later, it's always, you can type !paper in the chat box and it will pop back up. Or it'll be in the show notes below the video. if you are watching this on the YouTubes or later on Twitch also. So here we go. Oh, did I hit the download button? I don't remember. I did. Okie dokie. So, collective choice and social welfare considerations for Indigenous Australians. So, not the United States, but still probably interesting. Right, looking at Sen's work, we might wonder why he has not discussed more in the fields of social work, health, and human services other than those areas that are concerned with social development. That the structure of Sen's argument is grounded in the traditions of mathematical economics might be part of it. Many professionals in human services have limited mathematical knowledge or skills. Moreover, he writes in the broadly utilitarian framework, so that even his discussion of human rights draws on Bentham, Smith, Pareto, Arrow, Rawls, and so on. While professionals such as social work and human services often ground their understanding of social justice in assumptions about the primacy of human rights, justice is achieved when access to human rights is equitably distributed. Yet the core theories and concepts that Sen has provided raise significant questions for social welfare practices and policy, even if in his discussions, these theories and concepts are highly generalized. To review Sen's contribution through a discussion of the reissue of his groundbreaking work with its additional chapters requires a focus. How this text is understood is affected by the intellectual background and the theoretical starting points of the readers. In the case of this, it's a review article, that's alright. Review article, the authors are both social workers, while one is Indigenous Australian and the other is an immigrant, or New Australian as some people express it. So professionally, we are looking at these arguments from the position of concrete practices and policies, and at the same time drawing on comparison of experiences of the world insofar as this can shape our assumptions. From these different positions, we are agreed that we cannot discuss Sen's ideas in the Australian context without specifically considering what it has to say about the lives and well-being of Indigenous people for reasons that we set out below. As social work practitioners and academics, we also think it most helpful to look at a concrete area in which our own profession is implicated, along with other professions who share the same concerns and areas of practice. In this review article, we seek to do three things. First, we look at two of the significant ideas that Sen provides for us to examine social welfare questions, namely social choice or collective choice and capabilities. While the latter has already begun to be more widely considered in our broadly disciplinary area, the former is yet to be acknowledged. So the capabilities, but not social choice. All right. Second, in order to be able to review the ways in which the reissue and the extinction of Sen's early work can apply, we examine a particular case of social policy and practice, that is, health policy and services as these relate to Indigenous Australians. Third, we offer some conclusions about the implications of these thoughts not only for the specific case, but also for the potential considering Sen's work in social welfare as we understand it as a sector of professional life and the wider society. Okay. Indigenous Australians and social well-being. Whilst Indigenous Australians make up only 3%, approximately 700,000 people, of the total Australian population, they experience the lowest socioeconomic status and have the worst health outcomes of any group of Australian. A United Nations report found that Indigenous Australians have the worst gap in life expectancy for Indigenous peoples anywhere in the world, showing that in Australia, the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians is a difference of up to 20 years from birth. Yikes, that's terrible. Following concerns raised by then Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner Tom Kalma regarding this gap in life expectancy, the Council of Australian Government then committed to closing the gap and signed a Statement of Intent. From the Statement of Intent, the Australian Government has developed a policy framework that addresses not just health, but other areas that are classified as social determinants of health, such as education, employment, and economic development. The government aims to reduce the life expectancy gap through targeting the social determinants of health by addressing the gaps in school attendance, year 12 attainment, early education, reading and writing, employment, child mortality rates, and life expectancy. Whilst this appears to be a sensible approach and there have been some improvements, these improvements have actually been in the areas of social determinants and not in the area that is in focus, namely the gap in life expectancy between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Indeed, the areas of child mortality, early education, and year 12 attainment are the only targets that are on track, in terms of the targets that were set. The other thing that must be noted is that the aim is not to completely close the gap in any area of life expectancy, where it is aimed to close the gap within a generation. Most of the other areas seek to have the gap within a 10-year period or by 2020. Well, 2020 is going real well so far. I wonder how it's going for you. Which, with the exception of child mortality, has not been achieved. Well, that's at least something if you can get the child mortality rates down. One thing this does sort of reek of is the outside counsel telling people what they need to do best. I once was talking to a fundraiser for community organizing or something to that effect. Worked in the area of trying to help poorer communities, and she said that one of the biggest problems is that people would come in with a lot of money and then tell the people what to do with it, and they'd build a new building, a community center, but it was like not what the people actually needed, and so it was real nice, but like it didn't really get used or not used in the right way, and so it's just sort of like the patronistic version of helping people. It's like, yeah, you built a very nice center, had a nice like little party when you opened it, and then didn't really accomplish any of the goal, or didn't accomplish most of the goals that you wanted it to, but they were happy they got their photo up. Anyway, the review of Close the Gap by Oxfam Australia found that there were a number of shortfalls between the statement of intent and what the government actually implemented. According to Oxfam, these shortfalls included the government not aligning its approach to the statement of intent, not operating on a partnership with Indigenous Australians. Yeah, this is the issue, the partnership. That people come in and just do what they want in the end. Lack of appropriate level of funding for programs and limited planning for implementation and evaluation. Whilst the Oxfam review highlights the deficiencies with the government's actions in meeting its own strategy, there is still an even bigger issue that has resulted in the failure of the government to meet the targets it has set. There is a complete lack of ability to acknowledge or let alone address the underlying cause of the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians on every economic indicator. That underlying cause is the consequences and ongoing legacies of colonization. Within Closing the Gap policy, as it is generally known, this is evident most clearly in the way in which it is built on strategy, assimilation, assumptions, with an unrelenting focus on a form of convergence and structural adjustment based on Western economic institutions and norms as measured by statistical indicators. Yep. So they're doing it on their own terms, like what counts as a success. And so if you start trying to measure things on your own measures of success, it won't align with what the people actually are looking at, and so you're always going to be working at cross purposes. In this sense, the government's view of the causes of differences in life expectancy are completely explained by individuals' economic situations, so that if you can assist individuals to move out of poverty, then life expectancy gap would close, as this would then result in groups and communities also overcoming poverty. Alright. Yeah, so things ain't that simple. Social choice in Closing the Gap. However, as Sen argues in the new section of his updated book, poverty itself cannot just be defined or explained simply by an individual's income level. Sen's argument is that there is a need to look beyond income poverty to include other forms of poverty. Whilst it is a fact that Indigenous Australians experience both absolute and relative poverty due to being one of the poorest groups of people in the world, whilst living in one of the wealthiest countries, economics alone cannot explain either the socioeconomic status of Indigenous Australians or the failure of the government's policy. Yeah, it's called systemic racism like we have here in the US, and that's why everyone's rioting. Moreover, this poverty is more than material. It is essential to consider the social exclusion and the lack of power, political and otherwise, that Indigenous Australians can exercise. Yep. This is a central aspect of the problem, because in being able to make social choices, one must be able to exercise some form of capability in order to make those choices. In the earlier iterations of his ideas, Sen considered the importance of voting as a key mechanism within social choice theory. Yeah, but if you're like, this is the old thing in the history of the United States, like there's no taxation without representation, we can't vote. But of course, the voting system has to not be rigged against you too. Like, you can't actually vote if it doesn't matter. They didn't want to actually be able to vote in the colonial United States because we would just get voted down. We were just a colony, and everyone else would be like, nope, you can pay more taxes. So it actually has to matter. Alright. However, following classical utilitarian arguments, he then identified a major problem in the way that majority rules-based systems do not allow for the choice of minorities and to always be considered or indeed met. Yep, exactly. This is highlighted in Australia by the lack of political power that is held by Indigenous people. Now the voices of Indigenous people are left out of decision making. Yeah, I think here in the U.S., there was some Native American, our Indigenous folks. They made some deal with, like, I don't know, the people who set up this country way back when. They said that the Native Americans could have like a non-voting seat in like the government and on some high-level committee. They could be there. They couldn't vote, but they could just be there. And I guess only just recently, in the last few years, did they actually ever take the government up on their offer. I mean, they just refused to come in because they were allowed to be there, but they didn't get a choice in voting. So only in the last few years did they even, and this is like from 200 years ago, this treaty, did they actually send someone to the government to even sit in on like the important, whatever, high-level committees. It's like, yeah. Okay, left out of decision making. This continuing exclusion is one of the criticisms made in a study funded by Oxfam Australia of the government's implementation of the Closing the Gap policy. Whilst this policy is not voted on by the public, it did have a bipartisan support from all sides of Parliament. The number of Indigenous Australians holding seats within the Australian government is extremely low, and not even on parity with the proportion of population. However, even if the numbers of Indigenous Australians held seats in government were equal to a proportion of population, Indigenous Australians, even voting as a group, would still not be large enough to affect the outcome. It's the problem with democracies. You can always outweigh any small minority, because it's the nature of just 50% gets the sway. So Cripps points out that part of the problem is that the issues are seen as Aboriginal problems and that the politicians make decisions and implement programs without Indigenous input. It cannot be simply argued that Indigenous people do not have the knowledge or skills to make social choices for their own betterment. Rather, the mirror needs to be turned to those who hold the power, and consideration be given to the structured capacities that enable the social choices they make. Capabilities and closing the gap. At this point, Sen's work between the first 1970 and the second 2017 iterations of his thought on collective choice provides an integrative framework that is capability theory. Sen summarizes this concept in the form: a person's capability is represented by the combinations of functionings from which the person can choose any one combination, and notes the capabilities are to be seen in terms of what people are able to be or do, rather than in terms of the means or resources they possess. For Indigenous Australians, on this basis, the central problem of the Closing the Gap policy lies in being excluded from the possibility of a voice in process of social choice. Yeah, this is we get this in America because although a lot of the African Americans are very wealthy, comparatively powerful, but I mean, if you look at like the upper echelons, everything gets whiter and whiter. So the people who really make the decisions, there's always I was watching commentary on ESPN. It's always the general managers are always white, the owners are always white. So even though like a lot of the players and some of the other lower level positions, African Americans have positions there, but it's like they actually have decision in the way an organization is run? No, they don't. They have like local decisions, and it's been this way for a long time. So it can't just be like, well, they didn't. It's not that they didn't have opportunities; that there's something else going on, because there's no reason why it would continue to be so white at the very top if it was really just a meritocracy, seeing as there's so many high quality people in all the other positions. So alright, so this in turn shapes the capabilities that are open to Indigenous Australians. Yeah, that was my point. That it's not even though they have power, they don't have the capability because they can't get into the position that would give them the capabilities to make changes. So that's why. Okay. This in turn shapes the capabilities that are open to Indigenous Australians as Indigenous Australians in a collective sense. Consequently, the social choices that shape policy concerning Indigenous Australian health and well-being are exercised almost entirely by non-Indigenous Australians. Were those Australians who are Indigenous may also be seen may also see their own preferences reflected in policies, often in relation to other capabilities being achieved, such as through having received mainstream education, having a greater level of economic resources, being elected to a representative position. However, this is a circular problem in that the same limitations on capabilities that impact health and life expectancy also affect access to such education or material prosperity. Even election to a representative position is limited in its impact because, as we have noted above, the number of individuals who have achieved this are clearly below the proportions of indigenous people in the total population, and at the same time representation is restricted because of the concentrations of indigenous people in particular locations and the way this limits the number of elected representatives in a particular parliamentary democratic system. Yeah, we have election gerrymandering here. So what we do in the United States is that if we have people that the folks in power don't want to get any political power, they put them all in one little. They make the map so all those people that they don't like are in that one area, so they only get one representative, and that way they can get more representatives by breaking up the way the map looks, and so by doing that they therefore keep the numerical superiority in the positions of power in government. We're very clever here in the U.S. Sen's arguments provide a basis for us to consider alternative means to achieving the goals that are stated in aim of closing the gap, namely equality of life expectancy and all the other aspects of communities that this implies. As Sen reasonably reminds us, such an outcome is largely influenced by social goods, including access to education, especially for girls and women, and to primary health care. The issue is not whether individuals may prefer to go to school or not, and how many children in any community might choose to miss school in particular circumstances, or to access primary health care. The problem in the Close the Gap policy is that Indigenous Australians are denied the capability of possible participation in making choices about what steps might be taken to address social welfare in the broadest sense in Indigenous families and communities. Arguments that in many instances, the communities in question are remote, and so there are questions about the unit cost of provisions such as education or primary health only serve to draw attention to the way in which non-Indigenous Australians may also have capabilities denied in those circumstances. It does not remove the question of how such inequality can be overcome. But nor does this question become more pressing because non-Indigenous people may be affected. Rather, it demonstrates that the problem is not that of indigeneity, but of justice in social development. This is a point at which human rights and social justice intersect, even though the logics that sustain them are often in contradiction. Yeah, it's the old how are you going to pay for this thing, because clearly everyone, why should the people over here who have the money, why should they give their money over there? It's like, yeah, no, that's part of the problem, is the way things have been set up. And so, it's like, how are we supposed to pay for that? It's like, well, how is anything supposed to get paid for it? Yeah, decision of allocation. Anything else to say on that? I don't know. Nah, I'll keep going. Rereading Sen for social welfare. At the start of this discussion, we noted that considerations of Sen's work in the broadly defined domain of social welfare focus only on capability theory. Here we have sought to look at the way in which this approach to social choice might extend our understanding of the capability approach. We have used the concrete example of closing the gap policy in Australia, and through doing so have made some wider connections with issues facing Indigenous Australians. The larger philosophical and political implications of social choice and capability theory are clearly of importance for debates about the way that policy is formulated and implemented. In 1970, Sen used the term collective choice, and this seems appropriate given that for policies concerning education, health, and social welfare, the role of public institutions has been predominant over the last half a century. Because the rise of neoliberalism has introduced a private market dimension in the intervening period, this must now be seen in the context of a mixed modality of provision. However, the structure of institutions and the direction of developments remain very firmly in the hands of government as the representation of collective choice, very much steering and sometimes still rowing. In 2017, expanded discussion, Sen instead uses the term social choice without comment, although it not only reflects the classic reformulation of the idea, but also the more individualistic sense conveyed by other theorists, which makes sense in a neoliberal world. In this paper, we have also preferred the more recent usage because it is where Sen has arrived. The underlying point is that the balancing of competing interests and preferences is a responsibility of government in a representative democracy. Sen's approach, as extended in the 2017 iteration, has much to offer in this regard. Such concepts may appear not to have much to say to the day-to-day concern of the practitioners and managers in the health, education, and social services that policy seeks to shape. However, we want to conclude by arguing that in more specific ways they do provide a basis for rethinking some of the problems of the interaction between these institutions and Indigenous families and communities. For example, teachers, primary healthcare practitioners, and social workers are working with families and communities where there is likely to be a wide variation in the extent of engagement with the particular institutions, schools, clinics, community centers, or individual practitioners. Interestingly, this was recently acknowledged by the Australian government. See Higgins, Clark, and Conifer. It is also often these professionals who can ensure the voice of communities is first recognized and that dialogue might be achieved about the way social welfare institutions and practices can enable people's capabilities to lead the kind of life they have reason to value, the things they can or do be. Okay. Yeah, people can enable that. Okay. This means working with communities. So, yeah, this is one of the things that annoys me. When you have single quotes, yeah, formatting matters. This means working with communities so that access to institutions and practices are a means to achieving capabilities. For instance, working with rather than against cultural expectations can often generate greater engagement. This might seem paradoxical to those who begin with the view that problems of engagement come from a lack of willingness or ability to cooperate, as if, for some reason, Indigenous people might not have a reason to value an equitable lifespan, child free from preventable diseases and from assault, greater access to education, improved mental health, lower rates of youth incarceration, and so on. In other words, in the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians being closed. Institutions and practices that embody the capability approach might be expected to have a great deal to contribute to this. Sen's ideas and arguments may not be at the forefront of thinking about social welfare institutions and practices at the community level. Nevertheless, we are suggesting that they have much to contribute in shaping the ethos as well as the actions and goals of practitioners and managers. We suspect that the ideas presented in Sen 2017, along with his more widely influential work on capabilities, will be most explicitly seen in applied professional ethics. Yet ethical considerations are often highly practical, so it's precisely in the ways that they are addressed in this area that they may have an impact, and we may expect that they will. Okie dokie. So this was, I didn't realize this was a review article, but that's fine. If anyone out there has any questions about what's going on here, please let me know. I'll try to answer them. Again, not my area, but this was not like this was was a review article. It wasn't like super technical or anything like that. So details, there's not like some sort of detail. I don't think there's much here that was like in the weeds, as it were. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. In some sense, the question is, what is the goal of the social programs? Is it to make the people implementing the programs feel good about themselves, or is it actually to help the people that need the help? And then how do you represent that? And so if you're changing the capabilities of the people in that need the help, as opposed to just trying to change metrics, which is what kind of happened. Like if the one thing you're doing, you're saying, all right, we're going to stop with the infant mortality rate. We're going to bring that up to at least parity with everyone else. I mean, that's great. But like, it does not, it's like one of those, you're treating the symptom, not the disease. And the question is, what is the disease, and how do we understand what it is to fix the disease at that point? Because if you're just treating the symptom, like the infant mortality rate, you have to get that number up. Well, maybe it's like it's kind of like a whack-a-mole. You're hitting one, but it's just going to pop up somewhere else because you haven't treated the underlying problem. And so the question is, does the capabilities approach get at the more human sort of issue that I mean, they concluded with like, do you think the indigenous folks do not want all these very good things that the rest of society enjoys, and they do not, such as access to education and like healthcare and all the rest, which is crazy. So what? I guess the claim would then just be that the capabilities approach does provide a way, even at the ground level, to sort of make sure the focus is not actually on the treating the symptom, as it were, to get the numbers up just where you want the numbers up, as opposed to treating the underlying disease. Because it's like if you got heart disease and so, well, you have some sort of, and it's causing some sort of problems. It's like, yeah, well, let's say you get a rash because you have heart disease. It's like, well, I can give you a cream for the rash. Yeah, but you're gonna die if you don't fix the heart disease. So it's like, well, what is the capability here, and does the capabilities approach actually keep the focus on the underlying issue? And the authors are saying yes, because it does sort of keep it shifts away from the because people's capability to lead the life they have reason to value. So because it sort of, it's keeping the focus on the people here. People's capability is what it is. And once you do that, it's not talking about the statistical numbers that at the population level, which are of course like infant mortality rates or economic outcomes, but it's the individual person's capability. And as I said, this fits in nice with the sort of neoliberal picture of the world, because again, it's person focused, which is an interesting problem, because some of the other things that we read were everybody's kind of going anti-neoliberal at the moment, but maybe in this case, at least this is one of those cases, and it was one of the recent papers I read where they were saying, look, the use of neoliberal does actually give the sort of person-focused capabilities, like what they own themselves, what they can do with themselves, does give people a standing at the table when they don't have a standing at the table, because it puts them on par with the rest of the people. So by putting the capability back into the people, then at least you can sort of develop you can develop then their social standing, because they are on par with everybody else, because they have the same capabilities as everybody else. Granted, then you get the institutional problems, because they say, well, you have the same abilities as everyone else, but then the structured racism and structured inequality can be continued through other means, basically institutional issues, and so that eventually will lead up to it. That's a different problem, though. So even here, though, it's trying to focus at least on getting the issues back towards how do we give people capabilities and the institutional structures that would enable them to have those capabilities. Okie dokie. If no one has any questions, I'll be back, I guess, tonight with another paper. Alright, stay safe out there, folks. Bye-bye.